everyone, welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the program, and joining us are some of the filmmakers responsible for the shorts that you just saw. So going in order of the films that you saw in sequence, let's start with Matthew. Who are you? What's your film, and where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm Matthew Avery Berg. I'm the director of Marked. I'm calling from Los Angeles.
Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie Mitchell. I'm the lead actor and co-writer of The Wild Woman and the Painter, and I am calling from Virginia.
Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Margulies, and I'm the animator and director of the film Blue Cooler, and I'm calling you from Honolulu.
And Jay.
Hi, I'm Jay Kamal, the writer-director of the film Baba, and I'm calling from Vancouver, Canada.
Great. Well, great to have you all here. Thank you so much for sharing your films with us. Starting with Matthew, what was the inspiration for your film?
So, believe it or not, it wasn't based on the true story, but I was getting my sleeve done in Miami a couple years ago, and my tattoo artist, he was a former Latin King, he was a former gang member, and he was telling me about how, you know, when his daughter was born, he had gone he was in the Pee-wees, right? Like she was like 18 when she was born. And he was in the Pee-wees, which is like basically the youth unit of the gang. And he had basically one of the guys in a rival gang had done something. The kid was like 16, and they were supposed to just show up and just, you know, they didn't know what they were going to do to him, but they were supposed to show up and kidnap him and deliver them to their superiors or something like that. And when they showed up, the person that ran to the door was the guy's father. And, you know, he saw himself kind of in the dad, and he's like, I can't do this anymore. So he left the gang life. He left New York, he moved to Miami, and then he pursued the only legal thing he knew how to do from his gang life, which was tattooing. But as a tattoo artist, he actually tattooed way more dangerous people than he'd ever met as a gang member. And one of the guys he tattooed was Pablo Escobar's #1 hitman, JJ, otherwise known as Popeye. And they had this really strange conversation where he was asking him what it was like to kill people. Because even though he was in a gang and he had been in firefights, he had never shot someone point blank before. And the guy answered, he's like, I'm not a murderer, I'm a soldier. I only ever killed people that went against Pablo. And, you know, at the time in Colombia, it was a civil conflict going on. It was like a civil war. And so the cartels were they consider themselves almost like soldiers. And so it's just this really interesting conversation where they're having this essentially shop talk, and this guy's the ultimate barber for this hitman. And I was like, that is such a good concept to do. I need to do this at some point. I sat on this idea for a year. And then when Danny came to me saying, I want to do a film with you directing me, I was like, let's do this story, but he actually is Latino, but you could never tell. I'm like, you don't look Colombian, but what if we make it about Russian criminal tattoos, which are an even better metaphor? Because the story is about these two guys who can't escape their past. And in Russian criminal tattoo culture, it's your tattoos are all who you are. What your name is and what your past was before the tattoos don't matter. And so it's just this perfect metaphor. And so I took this story about this Colombian cartel member for Pablo Escobar and set it in the world of Russian criminal tattoos. I fictionalized a bit of the history to just move it forward and make them both American from Brighton Beach. But I think it worked well in the end.
It's really suspenseful and really tightly built. So kudos. It's a really terrific film. Sophie, what inspired you to share the film you shared with us today?
Well, The Wild Woman and the Painter really came out of kind of the creative paralysis that Erin and I were experiencing a few years ago after coming out of acting school together, because we were in acting class together for 2 years in New York. And we honestly didn't really hang out then. After school, I ended up moving into a neighborhood in Brooklyn, like 2 blocks away from her. So the story itself is like also, I don't know, like kind of our friendship too, because as we started to become friends and bond, we were bonding over like frustrating past relationships and frustrating creative blocks. Like we were both visual artists and actors, and we're really just tired of the auditioning process in New York. And then just got so frustrated. We were like, why don't we just make our own thing? And so we happened to be reading this book at the time called Women Who Run with the Wolves, which just takes like old stories and archetypes of female characters and translates them into kind of the psyche of women, and how the sort of wild archetype has been lost in modern culture for women. And it, really just grew out of that. We ended up, we went through a lot of drafts and it changed a lot, but we ended up, instead of making her like an actor or actress like we were, we made her a painter, because that's more visual. And we really pulled inspiration from everywhere. Like the wild woman character is heavily inspired by the goddess Artemis. We really wanted to use wolves in there because she's, the goddess of like wild animals. And couldn't get any wolves, not part of the budget. So we just sort of had to make it, convey the same message with what we had, which was a very, very limited budget. We had our crew was 4 people. So it was very bare bones. And I don't know. Somehow we pulled it off and managed to make, some kind of story about this sort of coming back to your creative inspiration and your wild nature, and how, even though that can be kind of a painful process, at times it's ultimately rewarding and worth it in the end. So, yeah.
The film really wonderfully captures the tension between the muse and the artist. It's never a very easy or a very safe relationship. You do a wonderful job visualizing that.
Thank you.
Laura, what was the inspiration for Blue Cooler?
I grew up in Hawaii, and I moved away for 20 years, and I lived in Manhattan, and then I moved home to Hawaii. And I was sort of inspired by things I had observed in Hawaii growing up, and, seeing how those things might have changed now. And I see lots of things that I think would be kind of interesting in a movie. So I wanted to make sort of an experimental movie that was kind of like a quilt or a collage. And so I just sort of collected images that inspired me for one reason or another, and I put them together. And the original idea for the film was actually to make an animated Academy leader, which is something that people do in the animation world. And so it was supposed to be just this really short, like 1 minute, a tiny little Academy leader with little clips of images. And so that's why I have the actual Academy leaders in the film. But it grew, and it became more of this quilt-like experience.
It's a wonderful tapestry, as you describe it, but it's infused with so much wonderful local color. What were the starting points you wanted to share in terms of what your home, what your surroundings are like?
There's a lot of like beautiful things, and then there's things that are not so beautiful. I wanted to share, the nature and the culture. There's lots of interaction between moms and kids in my movie. There's other cultural things like the fishtails that people stick to their, in front of their houses on telephone poles or on their door or whatever. And, it's cool, but it's also sort of weird. And so I wanted to show, all of these things as sort of in their good and their bad. So there's juxtapositions between, like the laundry floating on the clothesline, which is kind of, pretty and nice and atmospheric. And then there's the people dumping their garbage, and the garbage pile just getting bigger and bigger, which is, people don't really like to think about Hawaii as having, tons of pollution, but we have the same problems that everybody else does.
But there's a really wonderful dimension of humor about all your observations, good and bad.
Thank you.
Jay, what was the inspiration for Baba?
Well, Baba was inspired by 2 true stories that I combined into the film. One was my friend's story. He's a very good friend of mine, and I just had lunch with him after maybe about 3 years of not seeing each other. And the subject of fathers came up. And he told me the story about when he was growing up, his father was Muslim and his mom was Christian, and how complicated that was, navigating those two cultural landscapes as he was maturing into teenagehood. And that really became a lot more intense after his father passed away when he was a teenager, and he had to attend a funeral where his father had asked for both cultural traditions to be honored so that both sides of the family can grieve in their own way. And so the funeral was a combination of Muslim and Christian traditions, and it was very long and very complex. And it was very difficult for him to grieve having so much responsibilities at this funeral. The second part of the inspiration was my own experience. I was extremely close with my uncle growing up. He was very much like a father to me. And when he passed away, I was about 11 years old. And I remember losing a loved one at that age is extremely difficult for anyone, especially somebody that, you grew up very close with, like a parent. So I remember how I felt that day, and how I just wanted to grieve, but I wasn't really given the opportunity because I had to be surrounded by all these people and, keep a straight face. So I thought the combination of both of our stories would make a very beautiful film. And that's how Baba came to be.
Well, mission accomplished. It's wonderful how it straddles both worlds without really ever having a lot of conflict around it. It's just something that is so generous and so open-hearted and so deeply compassionate. All the live action films we're talking about here benefit from wonderful acting. Jay, starting with you, tell us about casting, especially the little boy.
Oh, the little boy was a tough one. We had to hire a casting agency just because it was very important for me that the film is in Arabic and in English at the same time. I didn't want it to be just in English because it's talking about a family that's immigrated from the Middle East. So it doesn't really make sense to me that, they would be speaking English at home. So for the little boy, it was a little bit less important. For the dad and the uncle, it was extremely important. For the little boy, we had 16 kids audition for that role. And Vancouver is a big film city. So, we had tons coming in, and all the kids had resumes longer than mine. And I've been working in film for about 10 years now. And some of these kids are like 10 years old and they just have credits for pages. So it was really difficult narrowing it down because they're all so good. And I narrowed it down to 3 kids. And the one we ended up casting, Kingston Gomez, was the least experienced. This was actually his first film. And he had begged his parents to let him audition for films, and they finally broke and decided to let him audition for mine. And something about his audition and something about when I brought him back for callbacks really drew me to him, especially when I was giving directions to the father actor who I already cast. I invited him into the callbacks to just see how they interact together. And as I was giving directions to the father, Kingston started tearing up. And he was so emotionally impacted by the other actor's audition that I knew that he was just right for this role because he could just bring that raw emotion to it that a lot of trained actors, maybe, it would be a little bit spent, or maybe it wouldn't feel very genuine. But with Kingston, even though he's never lost anybody close to him, just pulled it off. And he was just the perfect person for this role. Great.
Matthew, we see a very familiar face in your film. It's just two people, but Eric Roberts brings a dimension of threat, but also unpredictability. How much time was there any time to rehearse or to kind of walk through the film just because it's just the two of them?
So we rehearsed for like a half hour, maybe right before we started shooting, just when we were setting up the camera and the lighting. But that was pretty much it. From the very first take, they were just listening to each other. And they just worked so well together because, Danny, this is his first time, acting on a real project. He brings a certain, even though he in real life too, he's not a gangster in real life, but in real life too, he has this very hard, very, gang, like very scary look to himself, with the big beard. He looks like a mean guy. He has always has a mug on his face, but he, at the end of the day, in his eyes, there's a certain naivete and innocence that I think just complemented Eric's just dark wisdom and, aware of the world so well. And it just works so well together. Cause obviously Eric's, he's phenomenal actor. He has 3 Golden Globe nominations and Academy Award nomination to show for it. But, Danny, I wasn't expecting him to just listen so well. Cause that's the most you can ask for as a director, is 2 actors listening to each other, and just comes off as natural. And that started from the one time we rehearsed the first 4 pages, and it carried through the rest of the shoot.
That's great. Awesome. Sophie, you're starring with another character, but you don't have that kind of intimacy. There's a little bit more remoteness between you. How well did you try to explore a dynamic between the 2 characters, or was it always going to be very separated, very opaque, and very mysterious?
It was always going to be a little bit more separate. We had more footage of me by myself, and that didn't make it into the final cut. But we didn't really want that contact until the end. We wanted that to kind of be the payoff. And Erin and I wrote it together, so it wasn't even like we needed to kind of foster any intimacy. It was just already there. We were really good friends. We wrote it together. We wrote it so, we could be in it together and act together again, like we did in class. And so, all of that just sort of came naturally and just came out of the writing it together, the time we spent writing it together. Yeah.
And what character traits were you looking for in the Wild Woman, as far as presence or charisma goes?
It's funny, I actually just remembered, originally we wrote it so that the roles were switched. I was actually going to be the Wild Woman and Erin was going to be the painter. And that was the way we had it for a long time, until Erin was finally like, you know what, I really would rather direct it and have the smaller role. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Let's try that. And the character of the Wild Woman herself, again, just like we wanted her to be dangerous, a little bit dangerous at first and a little bit scary, and then become a comforting, almost nurturing figure. And so I think she pulled that off really well.
Laura, what kind of animation medium did you use? It resembles watercolors in a lot of ways.
It's mostly oil paint, and it's shot in a stop motion style. So I'm painting and shooting frames constantly for a long period of time. And in the end, nothing is left except for the final frame. So most of it is oil paint on a canvas, like a gesso board, and it's top lit. And then there's some parts that are other styles, like there's a few cutout sections, cutout animation, and there are a few sections that are watercolors and gouache on paper, but it's mostly done with oil paints.
And you say long time. How long did it take? I mean, it's a short film, but animated films sometimes are short. But
it took a really long time. I started it in like 10 years ago, at least. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it was worth waiting for sure. A question for everyone. Sometimes, or I would say probably regularly, a shoot never goes the way you expect it to. There's always something unpredictable. Sometimes it's a good surprise. Sometimes it's a happy accident. And sometimes it's a hurdle you need to get over. What did you learn from your shoot, whether it was a storytelling lesson or a practical, technical filmmaking lesson? Tell us each, starting with Matthew, what did you learn from this film that you're going to take away for future projects?
I think after this movie, I believe I can make anything work in the amount of time we have. And I mean that in two different ways. One is we didn't cast Eric until very close to shooting. And he had some, and it made the script a lot better. I appreciate them, but I basically had to rewrite the entire script 2 days before we shot. And it wasn't anything. He wasn't asking like, oh, change this. It was just a couple of things that he said about his character that I'm like, wait, this doesn't work the way I wrote it. And so I completely rewrote the script in 2 days before we shot. Completely new script the day we got to set. Some of the crew members accidentally still had the old script. And then once we got to set, it's with COVID and everything. And we were moving fast. And, when you're making a short film on a tight short film budget, is you don't have as much time as you'd like to. And I ended up having to, and the first AD was just like, well, at least we got good stuff for the, for Danny's reel. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we're not gonna be able to finish the movie. We can't shoot the ending. And I'm like, what do you mean we can't shoot the ending? He's like, we don't have time, because the ending was like, the ending was like 3 pages. And I'm like, okay, come here. I took the script. I cut out like 2/3 of the ending. I told him exactly how we're shooting it now. I rewrote it. I reshot it all within 5 minutes, and we shot the ending, and it works. I think it works very well. I think it's a great climax to the movie. And so I just know from now on, no matter how pressed for time you feel like you are, if you just trust yourself and you surround yourself with great crew members and great cast members like Eric, like Danny, you'll come out on top. Because I was even hearing stories from Eric about when they were in The Dark Knight and they were behind on time. And obviously that's, to me, even though I don't even usually like superhero films, that to me is one of the best crime thrillers of all time. So.
Sophie, what did you learn coming away from the film?
Oh, so much. This was our first film. This was my first film that I've ever done, and Erin's too. She'd done a little bit more than me, but first like actual short film. This was, we learned so much. I think the main thing for me, time, boy, oh boy. We were definitely running out of time during that last scene. The sun was going down, and my brilliant brother, our cinematographer, managed to make that last scene match and work through his magic wand on the computer with his special effects. But budgeting time, I think that's probably the biggest lesson for me, and knowing that it's still not going to turn out the way that you think it is. We cut a lot out to really make certain moments hit more. So also being aware of that in the writing process and the storytelling process, like really honing in on the moments that need to hit, and then knowing at the end of the day, it's going to be a little bit different. But again, like Matt was saying, like, just, you have to trust, trust so much.
Laura, what about you? What did you learn that you can use for your next project?
I learned that I don't want to take 10 years for the next film. I hope that I can do it in a faster time frame. But things that the way I've worked in the past, I have been confirmed that I like to work that way. I like to work with improvisation. So I like to have the actors who are doing voices improv, and then I like to pick the things that work the best with the images. And I also like to work creating images in an improvisational way. I don't really like to work from a really tight script or a tight storyboard. So those are two things that were confirmed that I want to continue with in a faster way.
Great. Yeah, it's a beautiful full immersion from the viewer based on the anecdotes that you choose to share. Jay, what did you learn from your film?
I think the two things that I learned is, one, trust your team, and two, don't be a jerk. Or rather, relearned those two things. So I work primarily as a cinematographer. The last thing I directed was about 6 years ago, and it was a tiny little short film. So I was a little bit nervous going into this, just having not really directed that much before. But I trusted that the team I would assemble would pull through and bring their talents. And the first thing that I did was I just, obviously brought on my key creatives, who are very good friends of mine that I had met, a really good friend who's a DP, some really great producers, a fellow writer who I've shot all of his films. He's a director, and he agreed to come on board and co-write and produce this with me. So really it was a chain reaction of really great friendships and connections that I had made over the last 10 years. And every key creative that has signed on to the project without hesitancy, they just said, of course, I'll work on your film. It would be a pleasure. So because they signed on, they just brought on more and more extremely talented and creative people. And before we knew it, with this tiny, almost no budget short film, we had all industry professionals working on it that are full-time professionals at what they do in each one of those roles. So couldn't really believe it. When I showed up on set and I was looking around and who was there, it didn't really feel like an indie anymore. It really felt like a high budget film. So instantly I felt extremely lucky. And I felt a huge responsibility to pull through and make sure that whatever we come up with is something that everybody can be proud of. So the trust your team aspect was very important in that, because, they say that the film's made 3 times, when you're writing it, once when you're shooting it, and again when you're editing it. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because the initial idea that I had changed quite a bit when I brought Javier, my co-writer, on, and he brought his own personal experience to shape the film into what it turned out to be. On the day while we were shooting it, my cinematographer and my actors just brought so much creativity and their own input into the film that just elevated it. And I thought that we had the film pretty much ready to go. And then my editor and the composer pulled through, and they just changed it once again for the better. So what we ended up with was something that everybody on the team was super proud of. And that makes me really happy.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone. Thanks for showing us up here. Thank you for sharing your experiences. They're wonderful films. And to all our Mill Valley patrons, thank you for supporting short films. Thank you for supporting the California Film Institute. There are a lot of other great short programs that you should check out, so please do. And we'll see you later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.